Cause the wound of our own anxiety and sadism. Ignorance is the mother of all evil, says the Gospel of Philip. Ignorance is the mother of all evil. The wise inherit dishonor. The wise will inherit honor, but fools get disgrace. Better to be unborn than untaught, said Plato. For ignorance is the root of all misfortune. Ignorance is the root of all misfortune. Aristotle said the educated differ from the uneducated as much as the living from the dead. So you might as well be dead as to be uneducated to these men who understood the consequences of not knowing. We talked about what ways of life and ways of seeing might be being jettisoned. Look at the schooling today alone. The study of that would horrify us. As we all know, we went through it. The kids of today are even worse. These critical ability, the judgment skill, the rational, the reason itself is under direct attack. It is indeed a war on consciousness. But, ladies and gentlemen, it's worse than that. It is a war on consciousness in which we act as double agents against ourselves. You thought it was bad enough when I said about strangling ourselves in the webs in our attempts to be free. It is worse. We are agents. Can you imagine? Fifth columnists, agent provocateurs, privates in the army in the war against ourselves. How cunning, how devilish could a thing be? That's why to undo this knot is equally challenging, equally difficult in its own way. Subtle, let's say. If you think that's crafty recruiting, by God, you're right, it is. That's why they have the power they do. You want to take that power away? I think everybody in this room wants to take that power away. Well, let's do it, but you have to do it through intelligence and understanding of what they know. Ultimately, it isn't that much. But it is its own study, its own discovery. We are now helped, of course, on a lighter note, that we are in this 2012 countdown, the age of revealing. It's an age of answers. Not the same as our forefathers had. There's reasons why it's still going. I know a lot of us lament. Why isn't this taking place? Well, I mean, what's going on? Why have people never done it before? How come they got so much power? Time. The movement of history. Very important. This is a unique period in Earth history. It's time for great strides because of two things. The information that we're sharing now, the information about this anatomy of tyranny, and the means of transmission, obviously. So it's a no-brainer. But those are unique. Our forefathers probably didn't even have both. In fact, the only ones who had the knowledge were a few guys shivering in some garret, or ready to be like Giordano Bruno, taken to the bloody Vatican Square and with a nail put through his tongue. Those are the ones who were in the know. And the list goes on. Ezra Pound. The list goes on. Not only physically assassinated, but even professionally assassinated. The age of answers means it is a time to ask the right questions. Any idiot can do that. Any idiot. It's way more than that. It's having the guts to accept the answers. Because any true answer will change you in fundamental ways. It will. Otherwise, what's the point of pursuing it? Might as well go and do something else. You must also love knowledge, not just want to gain it. They're two totally different realities. You must want the answers at any cost. Not just to fill a void. Or, again, slave below, I'm smarter than you. No. Because you have a relationship with the knowledge. And fundamentally and more important, you must have zero tolerance for the lie. It all hinges on that one, as we'll see as we go through. Vernon Howard, the American philosopher, put it so succinctly when he's talking about answers and solutions. He said that human sickness is so severe that few can bear to look at it. But those who do will become well. So the guts to accept the answer. It's very needed. And amid the cacophony of the world, the important questions of being go unheard and unanswered. But we must ask those questions. Krishnamurti said that until the false is seen as false, the truth is not. What was that Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes thing? It is by the painstaking elimination of the untrue that one comes upon the truth. The painstaking elimination of what is untrue, the truth is revealed. That is what we're doing. It's different than having opinions and believing other people. In the Atlantis book, I went deep into the past. People say, yo, you're into ancient history, Michael, even in the Atlantis? Not really. Not really. That's secondary. I'm interested in now. I'm interested in what I saw now. I'm interested in the evil that I see in life today. By being interested in that, yes, as a secondary interest. And then become obsessively interested, because I found the roots of all of this matrix of control in the ancient times, in this primal trauma. We don't have time to go into it in this talk. I've done it in the book and other places. We'll touch on it in important ways, though. I just want to make you understand that, look, think of the cataclysms of Passchendaele. Think of a tsunami. Think of trench warfare. Think of hurricanes and all sorts of genocides. Think of breaking up with a girlfriend. And maximize those traumas hundreds of times. Hundreds of times. It's hard to even find even a metaphor to describe what it was like for our ancestors, this shake-up. Because even if you don't buy into my theory of the genetic manipulation, that's a bit hard to handle for people, because that was a source of the trauma as well, by the way. You cannot now deny that there was the cataclysm, the physical cataclysms. It's been proven by scientists. My Atlantis page in the forum will inform any skeptic of the latest up-to-date news headlines reports, confirming completely not only the location of Atlantis itself, but all of the cataclysms of a physical nature and their after effects. Now, why has nobody asked what did that do to the psychology of man? Peering at the rocks and the geological formations and how it split the continents. Whew! Bored to tears, I would be. I'm interested in if that, people weren't just sitting in their armchair watching it on the screen. They were living in absolute Armageddon, billions of animals dead. Unbelievable. You read the legends. What did that do to their consciousness? And subsequently, as I found out, it did so much damage that the architecture of power that we have today is based on it. It co-opted it. Theodore Reich, psychologist, says that Joseph Feldman comes to the conclusions that at the foundation of those oldest traditions, there must have been some historical event that left deep traces in the memory of all people. Shwela Delubich, great Egyptologist, said that man is perfect at his origin, a divine being who is degenerated into what we are. Gerald Massey, he said the primitive man was not a 100th part so likely to be the victim of hallucinations or disease subjectivity as modern man. What's this got to do with the anatomy of tyranny, more specifically? Because we don't remember it. The architects of control know all about this. They know the history. They know what happened. Don't you think this, like the Nazis sent out their anthropologists and geologists to take the skull sizes of every pygmy they could find? These people do business. Well, don't you think that the higher powers than them have a thorough understanding? Don't you think their vaults are full of all the relics to this very day? They know what we don't know. They know we don't know. They know we have the historical amnesia, and that is what they're hoping for. That's what they've used. They cash in on it. But I don't know if I mentioned it clearly enough in the Atlantis book, or maybe I did, but it certainly needs to be mentioned now. You may junk the memory of something, even a thing that happened in your daily life, in your personal life. You may junk the memory, repress it, dissociate it, whatever you want. You may do that. But you can't change the fact that it has effect on you. Right? The wound is still there. You can forget about it, but you can't change its effect. The effect has already happened on you. Schizophrenia, shattered mind, from the Greek. The divide or the split. We are schizophrenic people in many ways, genetically and also mentally, because we've created a barrier between ourselves and that memory of what happened. What arose from that is the ego. The barrier is policed by the ego. This incredible thing is this ghost. I've described it as the ghost that arose from the grave of the self. A thing that loves disorder, loves troubleshooting the disorder, loves manufacturing the problems and chaos to stay in charge. It actually goes around creating a lot of the chaos that we see, psychologically speaking. This trauma happened a long time ago. A short time ago. Historically speaking, it was a short time ago. So remember, Age of Answers, 2012? We are still very young in this. This transition period of 2012 we're going through is one of the rites of passage of an awakening, certainly, yes. Or more, shaking up as well, though. Because we're still in the very early phases of this original trauma. We're babes in history. And our mental development, the healing, it has to continue. And, one can be optimistic and say it'll go well, but the architects of control are there to prevent it from going well. Inasmuch as the ego is only the centrum of my field of consciousness, it is not identical with the totality of my psyche, being merely a complex among other complexes. Hence, I discriminate between the ego and the self, since the ego is only the subject of my consciousness, while the self is the subject of my totality. Hence, it also includes the unconscious psyche. In this sense, the self would be an ideal factor which embraces and includes the ego, right? So the ego is here, and the true self encompasses it, embraces it. Backing up what I'm talking about the prehistoric trauma, Julian Jaynes. In The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, Julian Jaynes argued that self-consciousness, subjectivity, right, emerged even more recently at the time of the Bronze Age, some 5,000 years ago. According to Jaynes, there was no sense of I before this period. It was their first experience of thinking mind's internal monologue. Jaynes speculates that ancient peoples attributed to hearing the voice of a god or being addressed by spirit. In other words, he's talking about the creation of the ego. It hasn't been there forever. Very recently created the kind of consciousness we have now. But what about that other ancestral consciousness? Where's that? That's the imperial self that's still functioning back there. It's the ancestral voice, or as we'll talk about later on, the imagination is another word for it. Theodore Reich says that William James has described the puzzling phenomena of self-observation. Remember we talked about that in the beginning? The I observes the me. It is obvious that the precondition for such a phenomena, observation of one's own mental and emotional processes, must be a split within the ego. This split makes psychology possible. In fact, this split makes psychology necessary. If the ego were undivided, it couldn't observe itself. It would have no need to observe itself. Another manifestation of this very split we're talking about, duality. We are divided, we are split, our way of seeing is divided, fragmented, so everything we see in the creation is the same. Life is filled with it, you and me, and a myriad other ones. We should all be familiar with them. Then, after the damage has been done, we've got to explain it. And another preposterous mysterium is created to explain the first mysterium. All of them irrational. Well, Jung is saying it. I'm not denying that great gains have been resulted from the evolution of civilized society, but these gains have been made at the price of enormous losses whose extent we are scarcely begun to estimate. And that is where the master-slave comes in. Because this ancient trauma weakened our psychic constitution, right? We're divided within. We're weak psychologically. That's why we want a master above us and slaves below us, bosses on all sides. And the masters are only too happy to oblige. Glenn Parton says that we have internalized our masters, which is a well-known psychological response to trauma. When faced with an overwhelming terror, the human mind splits, with part of itself modeling itself after the oppressor. This is an act of appeasement. Look, the mind says in effect, I'm like you, so don't harm me. Otherwise known as the identification with the object of one's hate. Putty in the master's hands, remember that? It's infantilism is what it is. Jung says consciousness is a very recent acquisition of nature and is still in an experimental state. It is frail, menaced by specific dangers, and easily injured. As anthropologists have noted, one of the most common mental derangements that occur among primitive people is what they call the loss of a soul, the loss of selfhood. Nothing more than that. Jung goes on to say, modern man does not understand how much his rationalism, right, that's this egoism, has put him at the mercy of the psychic underworld. In other words, his division has huge consequences. He's freed himself from superstition, or so he believes, but in the process he has lost his spiritual values to a positively dangerous degree. His moral and spiritual tradition has disintegrated, and he's now paying the price for this breakup in worldwide disorientation and dissociation. Who do you think sits back going, love it? Egging it on. David Watson, Pathology of Civilization, says we reproduce catastrophe because we ourselves are traumatized, both as a species and individually, beginning at birth. See, he only takes it back to physical birth. You've got to go along They don't understand this concept of prehistoric physical trauma and genetic trauma. Now, because we're wounded, we have to put up psychic defenses against reality and have become so cut off from direct participation in the multidimensional wilderness in which we are embedded that all we can do is navigate our way cautiously through a humanly designed day-to-day substitute world of symbols. Now we take a break and we'll come back after half an hour. The next section will be on collectivism so that we unpack some of these ingredients of tyranny a little bit better. Ladies and gentlemen, let's come back in about half an hour.